Hello, and welcome to the first class from the Jedi Path Academy's Learner program. Tonight we're going to present a class on attachment and non-attachment. I am your presenter, L. Christopher Bird. I think you all deserve to know who's teaching you tonight. So a little bit about myself. I began walking the Jedi Path in 2005 by asking, why not? Basically, I caught wind of the Jedi census phenomenon, where there was a movement of trying to get Jedi recognized as an official religion in the Commonwealth countries. I believe many of these people were doing it tongue-in-cheek, and it was a joke. Some people were sincere. We find out later. I did not know that at the time, but I thought to myself, well, why not? Why couldn't you actually make Jedi be a real religion? And so I wrote an essay about what I thought the Jedi religion would look like. You can see the video presentation of that essay on my YouTube channel in the Jedi 101 series, the last video. In 2012, after I've been doing the Jedi thing, getting kind of serious for about 7 years, I created the website, JediPath.org, where I thought I had enough understanding and enough to say about the Jedi Path that if I shared my thoughts about what it meant being a Jedi, that it might help other people along the way. And that's been the mission of what I've done with the Jedi Path Academy since 2012, is I'm in the business of helping people be Jedi of quality. In 2017, I was knighted by California Jedi at the California Jedi Gathering. To understand that, the knighthood standards are at the website californiajedi.org, and under real life training and knighthood standards, you will see everything that I was meant to uphold, and which I still continue to uphold to this day. It's not, to me, to speak a little bit about knighthood, it's not about the title, it's not about the accolade. I saw the requirements for knighthood as a good metric to measure my training. And becoming a knight just means more work and more responsibility. And if anyone here has aspirations of becoming a Jedi Knight, that's what you can expect. More work, more responsibilities, many of which you should already be doing before you get the title. So, without further ado, we're going to go into the class material. And the first thing we need to look at today is what is attachment, the definition of attachment. Different spiritual traditions have their definitions of it, but as I've been quoted, the Jedi Path has its own DNA. We take our inspiration from Star Wars and Star Wars media, and we see if it's applicable to real life. And so the clue that we have from the Star Wars lore is in the Revenge of the Sith. Yoda tells us to let go of everything we fear to lose. And when we're talking about attachment in a Jedi sense, the root of attachment in our path is this fear of loss, anything we're afraid to lose. And these things can be myriad and many, and there's all kinds of different attachments. So this is a discussion, so I'm going to open it up to the floor. If anyone has anything about what they want to say about their definition of attachment, perhaps, or we'll get into experiences with attachment a little bit later, so let's hold off on that. But just what you think attachment is. And Brandon is helping us today. And Brandon, is there anyone in the chat that wants to speak?
No hands have been raised yet.
Okay, quiet class. That's fine. Oh, Breeze has raised his hand. Go ahead, Breeze.
When I think of attachment, what I'm thinking of is the urge or the impulse to the desire to possess to the point where other people cannot have it, and to control.
Yes.
Especially the elements that are normally out of control, like someone's destiny or personality or choices.
Most definitely, and that fits in with the lore, because that's the very definition of what motivated the Sith, the bad guys, what we as Jedi do not want to be, ideally, because they're motivated by greed and selfishness, and they want to hang on to things and keep them from themselves. And yes, and they are fearful of other people taking those things away from them. So not necessarily the possession of things when we come to the characters of the Sith, but the accumulation of power. And they hold on to that power jealously. And they're afraid to lose it. And if they think someone is going to take it from them, they get angry. And that anger turns into hate. And as we know from episode 1, that hate turns into suffering, usually by the person that was holding on to that attachment. In Buddhist thought, they believe that attachment leads to suffering. And Lucas, in this sequence, fear, anger, hate, suffering, gives us one of those paths, the paving stones between fear of loss and suffering. All right, looks like we have other participants raising their hands. Brandon, can you tell me who's next?
Jenna is the next, and then Tusenia.
Okay, Jenna, go ahead. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
So I was just thinking that in this context, that attachment is basically, fear of change or fear of impermanence. So, like letting go of a cat. Sorry, that was my cat leaving. So it could be, the Jedi perspective could be accepting impermanence, accepting that change is going to happen.
Yes, most definitely. You're jumping ahead to the very last slide, believe it or not.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. But we will talk about this when we're talking about when it's time to let go and how to let go. And so we're going to put a pin in that, and I promise we will come back to it. Okay, who's next?
Next is Tusenia.
Yeah.
Turkania.
Yep, Turkania. So my question is about the anger leads to hate, because I've known people who become angry and have turned it into good, have let that spur on their work with that community or whatever, right? Like formerly abused people who have turned it into helping women get out of abuse situations.
Right. There is I have a running joke at Jedi Path Academy that I have an essay for every occasion, and there is an essay on JediPath.org that addresses this, but I will describe it briefly. The kind of anger you're talking about is a kind of righteous anger, and a justified anger. And this is not a blanket statement. I mean, there was a saying about absolutes in episode 3. So everything we want to dig below the surface and look at the nuance of things. There are times where anger serves a righteous purpose. I had this experience in my own life, and it's in the essay. I'm not gonna discuss it right now. But what I found is that anger by itself, anger and passion, is unsustainable in the long run. It burns you out. You cannot sustain. But you can have this emotion where anger is tempered by compassion, a compassionate anger, which seems like an oxymoron, but it is possible. I have felt it. Perhaps others here have felt it as well. And it is that compassion with that element that makes it sustainable, makes it sustaining. Does that clear things up with you, Turkenia? Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense, but I'll have to think about this compassionate anger a little bit more.
It's a difficult concept. It's complicated. And do we have more raised hands, Brendan?
Yes, Christy.
Okay, Christy, please go ahead.
Yeah, I feel like this fear of loss is often around something or someone meeting our needs, some external agency that we are using to have our needs met in some way. So we have a responsibility to develop independent methods for getting those needs met ourselves or within ourselves.
That's a good insight. I don't have anything to add to that. That is full marks. Go to the head of the class. Very good. Okay. If there's no one else, I think we're ready to go to the next slide. Is there anyone else? No? Great. Okay.
Nope, we're good to go.
Let's go. Okay, so now we're going to talk about types of attachment. And attachments fall into 3 categories: necessary attachment, unnecessary attachment, and beneficial attachment. So necessary attachments are basically things that are like in the hierarchy of needs. These are things that we need for life, and we should not let go of in most circumstances. I mean, we have examples of the lore of great self-sacrifice where Jedi do let go of everything. But as long as we're in this fight that we call life, we need to hang on to these necessary attachments. Unnecessary attachments are those attachments which we should be able to let go of. We'll open this up to discussion a little bit, but I want people to start thinking about the attachments in their own lives and what might be necessary and unnecessary. And then there's a category of technically unnecessary attachments, but they are beneficial. And a beneficial attachment, they're all right to have, but we should be able to let go of it if it becomes necessary to do so. And which leads to the question, how do we tell the difference? And we're going, and I'm not gonna preach. I'm not gonna spell it out for you right now. I have my opinion on this, but this is a discussion-based class, and so we're gonna hear the participants' ideas of the 3 kinds of attachments and how we tell the difference. So I'm going to open this up to the floor. And Brandon, you'll let us know when someone's ready to talk.
Anna's raised her hand.
Okay, Anna, go ahead.
All right, so I think a necessary attachment is something that is meeting a base core need to sustain our lives. So for example, a beneficial job or housing, things that support us in the lives that we live. But I would say necessary is, as far as attachments go, necessary has a cutting off point where something can be beneficial, but you can let go of it and you're still on a baseline path, meaning that your life won't be completely disrupted once the attachment is gone.
Yeah, that's a very good insight. Yeah, exactly. Full marks. Join Christy at the end of the class. Very good. Who's next?
There are no other hands raised. Oh, Lucy raised her hand.
Okay, go ahead, Lucy, please.
Okay. No, I'm agreeing with it, everything. One of the things that I've gone through, whether things are necessary or beneficial to my life, I still try to develop a mindset of thinking, obviously nothing is permanent. So mentally letting go of things and not being attached, whether it's my house or my husband, the thought that my life couldn't go on without something has to go away, so that should I have to deal with something, I know I can stay strong.
Right. And so what is at the root of that feeling? If you don't mind sharing.
Just having experienced a lot of loss in my life, it was a mental, I mean, when I started the Jedi Path, this was a thing where I did go to the point of mentally preparing myself to let go of everything. And the only necessary thing I would think of is food, sustaining life,
Yeah, that's a bit of an extreme.
It was an extreme, but it's a mental preparation that I put myself through.
To share personally, the pendulum has swung in that direction that far for me as well, and I had to move it back. When I first ran this workshop in 2017, I had not really kenned onto the idea of beneficial attachments yet. I had more work to do, so you are all benefiting of 3 years of training and meditation since then. But yes, indeed. Okay. And who's next, Brendan?
The next hand belongs to Turkenya.
Turkenya, go ahead, please.
So I was just going to point out too that sometimes we think something is a necessary attachment because we live in the first world instead of a third world country. So, we're accustomed to having running water, and in other places they don't. What the necessary thing is that we have clean water to drink, not that it's running water necessarily.
Good. So a little bit of necessary, beneficial, and sometimes, as we were discussing earlier, the rest of the class is not privy to this, but things can get a little messy when we try to make these clear demarcations, and life is messy, and sometimes these definitions are not so clear. Sometimes something fits in more than one category. And as Jedi, as quality human beings, we need to be okay with that messiness and not have things necessarily fit cleanly into these categories that we create. Because honestly, the categories are artificial when we get down to it. But these categories allow us to work with it. And
if we think back to the beginning of this COVID-19, when the stores were just ravaged, a lot of us were like, it's necessary that I have this brand of whatever, right? And
Sure.
then you learn very quickly that, no, that's not necessary. It's necessary that I have food. It doesn't matter if it's this brand of this or this thing or, whatever. It's like, I'll eat something different.
Yes, indeed. And for those of you watching this later, this is recorded on May 21st, 2020. We're still in the midst of the global COVID-19 pandemic. And so very timely now. I don't know if this recording will exist in a time for a generation who did not live through the pandemic. But if this is the case, ask your parents. And but right now we're in it. And thank you, Turkania. And who's next?
The last hand of the moment is Christy.
Okay, Christy, go ahead. You have to unmute yourself.
For me, I feel like an attachment to kind of my guiding core principles is very necessary as sort of a beacon,
I'm not exactly sure. Could you clarify? Could you expand on that?
Well, okay, like a long time ago, I decided that I wasn't going to let this world rob me of my joy and my cheerfulness because so much bad stuff happens and there's so much abuse and harm and hurt, and that turns so many people so sour. And then they go and they hurt other people. And I made a conscious choice that no matter what I experienced, I wasn't going to let it steal my happiness. So it's kind of my that's something that I consider so core to my being. I never want to let it go.
So that seems like a necessary attachment because our emotional well-being, I would say, is necessary for life. It's definitely part of the Jedi path that we practice, where we practice emotional well-being, emotional wellness. So yeah, totally necessary attachment there, and beneficial, I would imagine. Okay, so so we never touched on how do we tell the difference. How do we tell the difference? And for this, we go back to the first slide. We reflect, we check our internal landscape, and we see what we are afraid to lose and how afraid we are to lose that thing or that person or that object or that particular outcome that we have our hearts set on. And so that's how we check in, is we look at where that fear is and what the result will be if we actually do lose it. If it's taken from us or we let go of it, because that's a choice we have. And I think we had a hand up, Brendan.
That was Jenna, who has informed me across the room that she has put it down.
Okay, very good. I think we're going to move on to the next slide. So here we get to do some lore dorking. And our lore is Star Wars. And so we have two characters that show us different illustrations in attachment. And first we have Anakin Skywalker, who his arc is especially through the prequels, he does get redeemed at the end, but between that and being redeemed for 5 minutes and dying, he had strong attachments that were rooted in a fear of loss. And then to contrast that, we have the character of Ezra Bridger. He may be a little bit less well known. I know there are some participants who have not watched Rebels yet. He is the young protagonist in Star Wars Rebels. And at the beginning of his arc, he avoids attachment and he has a fear of connection. And he has an arc, but I'm going to open this up to the room. Thoughts on Anakin, thoughts on Ezra, and how they contrast. I see people deep in thought. Does anyone have any thoughts? Brandon, does anyone raise their hand? Oh, here we go.
Yeah, Breeze put his hand up. I'm going to go with him first.
Okay, Breeze, go ahead.
As I understand it, attachment and aversion are fundamentally the same impulse. Whether I'm I'm Anakin saying, I'm going to make sure my secret wife never gets upset, never gets hurt, never dies. I'm going to make sure my kids never get hurt, never get sick, never die. Or Ezra's saying, I'm afraid of other people. I'm afraid of needing, and so I'm going to make sure that I never get hurt. And ultimately, this is, sort of a fear-informed urge to control things beyond, what one can actually control.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, attachment and aversion are basically the same thing.
Yeah, that's a great insight. And and again, it's based on fear. Fear, again. It's like, this is something that as Jedi we have to come to terms with. We don't avoid fear, but we don't let it control us. And full marks. Go to the head of the class, Alex. And who's next?
Next is Lucy.
Lucy, please go ahead.
I was going to piggyback a little bit on my earlier comment, and this slide brought it up again. I think I've been in both these categories. But when I was talking about like letting go of everything I fear to lose, I went to a point of Ezra Bridger detachment, and that wasn't a good place either. And I am actually coming back from that a little bit. So my opinions might change, but that just avoiding attachment altogether and fears of connection is something I can identify with. So I'm curious to how that goes.
Okay, and we will continue on that. Oh, pardon me. The puppy one wants to contribute. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna pause the recording and we'll. Oh well, okay. She went. Okay, for those watching, my dog got quiet. We're gonna continue. Less editing for me. I'm real here. I'm not professional or slick, despite how good the slides look. But that wasn't my work. Really, that was the PowerPoint AI that did it for me. I'm sorry, I got distracted. Okay, who's next, Brandon?
The next hand is Kalos.
Kalos, welcome. Is he having trouble unmuting?
Okay, sorry.
Got it. Great.
All right. So I think what this brings up to me is, I think what one perceives as their power versus what is actually in their power. And in terms of, seeking control versus avoiding control or avoiding attachment or pursuing attachment, that's related to how one feels one can control one's environment and the people in that environment. And just learning to accept that, there's things that you can't control, that might lead to a better sense of what is within one's power to, what is worth being attached to and what not being attached to. It kind of goes back to the prior, what is beneficial, what is necessary versus unnecessary, is a recognition of that sort of ability to interact and understanding what actually you can control versus what you can't control.
Indeed. Okay, so let's break out a little bit and talk about that particular kind of attachment, because this was Anakin's attachment. He wanted to control. He wanted to have absolute control over what happened to those he loved. and later the whole galaxy. He wanted to control everything. When he was tempting Luke, he said we could rule the galaxy together. He thought he could use Luke's power to control everything. And so I usually talk about this as the attachment to a desired outcome, where we want something so desperately that we grow attached to this idea of how we want things to work out, how we want things to happen. And that kind of attachment is definitely unnecessary and unhealthy. And it caused, in Anakin Skywalker's arc, a lot of pain and a lot of suffering and a lot of death, if we're completely honest. And that's a particular difficult attachment, letting go of the way we want things to be. And so that's Anakin's arc, and he was never able to let go of that, for decades in his story arc. And so that's Anakin's arc. So do we have more thoughts on that from the crowd?
There's one more hand up, which is Jenna.
Go ahead, Jenna.
So I was just thinking that I know fear of loss is under Anakin, but it's really a thing for both of them, because both of them have underwent, significant losses. You learn more about Ezra's later in the series.
Go ahead and describe it. Go ahead and describe it. It's fine.
Oh, well, I mean, Ezra, basically, not to spoil any of the specifics, Ezra is on his own because he's lost both of his parents. They essentially were taken from him in a sense. And so he has, actually both of them have effectively lost parental figures. And so one of them, goes towards, is seeking answers, seeking power, and Ezra on the other hand is avoiding. And I think it actually goes back to just regular psychology and childhood development and all of that. There's a concept of adverse childhood events where, what happens early on in life is sort of linked to what people go through and how they process things later on. So yeah, both of them, there are very different ways that people can cope with what they go through, and so you just see polar opposites here of what they end up doing, not what they went through in the first place.
Polar opposites, but at the same root, right? It's two different approaches to trying to avoid loss, right? So Ezra is like, well, I've had this loss, and to avoid that ever happening again, I'm never going to connect to anyone ever. I'm going to be on my own, and I'm going to look out for myself, and I'm not going to let anyone get close. And Anakin is like, I'm going to seek these attachments. I'm going to hang on to them as tightly as I can so I don't lose it again. But they're both suffering from this fear of loss. Did you have more, Jenna?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay. And so we talked about Anakin's arc, very unhealthy, and a lot of things. But I wanted to talk about Ezra's arc and what happens with Ezra, because Ezra is an illustration of a healthy approach. But I saw Breeze had his hand up, so I think I'm going to let him jump in before we talk about Ezra's arc.
Yeah, real quick, I just to piggyback on what Jenna said. I think ultimately there's this, both of them experience this wounding. There's this sort of fundamental, like biological need in their parenting that is withdrawn. And they're both addressing that need, the fear of further pain, right? like, I've been hurt so much, I won't be hurt again. So Anakin is, latches onto Padme and sort of stuff her in this mother-shaped hole in his life, whereas Ezra has this sort of paradoxical, but ultimately, and I think somewhat less dangerous to the people around him, response of just basically building a fence around his wounds. No one gets to come this close to me ever again, so that no one ever gets to put a hole in me. And this is there's a fundamental attachment. There's a fundamental issue of attachment that underpins the further issues of attachment, which is these initial people left my life. This is a real thing that I can't control. And in my desire to hold on to even these, apparently essential things, they wound me because I can't let them go, and I think about that in terms of my own family. It was a sort of a thing I realized, years ago. It's just, there's really not, I love my family, but there's nothing I can do to protect them up beyond a certain point. Like if my wife goes out to march and gets hit by a car, that's what happens, and there's nothing to be done about it. And the issue then becomes, do I love her? Yes. Will I grieve her? Yes. Is it going to destroy my world? Yeah, for a little while. But, and I don't mean that flippantly or casually, but it's just, the universe doesn't really make these distinctions between what I think is important and what I don't. And I have to have this attitude of I'm willing to hold them in my life for the time that they're here, and I'm willing to let them go when it's time to let them go, because I don't actually have any control over that, And so there was a fundamental misunderstanding of, who these people were and what they could and could not release in the beginning, that causes this reaction that kind of spins out of control, so that, Anakin becomes Vader and Ezra is just kind of a jerk until they kind of get their shit together eventually. Pardon my English.
That's fine. We're adults. I'm not going to mark the content on YouTube for kids. So little adult language is fine and accepted. No worries. So is there anyone else that's wanting to talk, Brandon?
There are no more hands at the moment.
Okay. So let's talk about Ezra's arc. So we've talked about Ezra in the beginning a lot. Let's talk about where Ezra goes. He learns to build these healthy connections, these, let's say, loving connections with a supportive family. It's not all hearts and daisies. They don't, but they grow into, let's call it, love for this family that they have on the Ghost. And it turns out that Ezra's superpower actually is connection. His ability to connect to others is what makes him such a unique Jedi, because he has these connections that are so strong. Even though he was damaged, he had this healing thing. So, and so let's talk about the Force a little bit. One of the lenses through which I see the Force is I see it as connection. Like you'll see Sith, and they look at the Force in terms of power. And in my Jedi opinion, they're missing the point, because the Force is not about power. It's about connection. And as Obi-Wan tells us, when we first hear that the Force is even a thing, the first thing we hear about it is that it surrounds us and it binds us. It connects all things. And it's through this healthy connection that Ezra learns a healthy attachment attitude. He forms healthy attachments. And in his ultimate arc, And I know there's someone in this class who has not seen Rebels, and I do apologize. But he is able to let go of these attachments when he needs to. When someone in his family makes a great sacrifice, he's able to let go. Though it takes work, he doesn't do it right away. There's several episodes dealing with this loss. And then when it comes to his own role as a Jedi, his crowning achievement is being able to let go of all these things that give him benefit and joy and support in order to save everyone. And this is a healthy, good illustration of what it means to be a Jedi of quality in the fiction, and something we can aspire to attitude-wise as real-life Jedi. Okay, so we're going to open it up to the floor again before we go on to the next slide.
Turkenia has their hand up.
Go ahead, Turkenia.
So I was just going to say so I haven't seen the whole Ezra arc, but one of the things I noticed in my life anyway, because I tend to be one of these avoid attachment, fear of connection people, more so than not. One of the things I noticed is that if I have compassion for people, it helps. It's like the chink in that armor. So it's easier for me to feel compassionate towards somebody rather than accept it from somebody. But I do find that this is like one of the secret sauces, I guess, for helping with that.
Indeed. The way I approach the Jedi Path, I go by what George Lucas said that inspires what the Jedi represent, and that's compassion and selflessness. And so, my definition of compassion is not just an emotion of feeling, but compassion is compassionate action in which we are lessening the suffering of others. And that's my definition of compassion. There's some misconceptions in some corners of the Jedi community as to what compassion is, and that's my take on it. And compassion is central to my path. And I thank you, Turkenia, for bringing that up. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think that's it.
Okay, I think we're ready to go on to the next slide.
Well, we have one more hand.
Oh. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, and who's next?
That would be Kalos.
Kalos,
me.
Go ahead.
Speaking of Ezra, I think one of the things that you see through his development in the Force is not just a connection with the people in his life. It's actually just with life. I mean, you see that he has this connection with various animals, various creatures, and that could be considered just sort of an abstraction of not an attachment to individuals, but an attachment to the breadth of life, and an empathy for living things in general. And I think that signifies a growth in, I guess we would say, healthy connection, and a connection that's beneficial to everybody around him. And I think that's kind of an essential aspect of his character and his arc through the series.
Yeah, full marks go to the head of the class. Great comment. I have nothing to add with that. That is perfect. Great job. Kalos. How do you pronounce it? Let's get it right.
Kalos.
Okay. We'll know for future classes. Okay. Is there? Okay. This time I'm going to check. Is there anyone else that wants to speak on Anakin and Ezra?
There are no other raised hands at the moment.
All right. Thank you, Brandon. So this is about letting go of attachment. So in Attack of the Clones, Anakin Skywalker, who we know is not the best authority on it, as we explored the previous slide, but he has this line, attachments are forbidden. I think he was being a little bit extra personally. But that's what we have in the lore. Attachments are forbidden. And so we've already discussed there are some attachments we want to hang on to, beneficial and necessary. It's great, but there comes a time, and Breeze touched on this, that there's going to be a time when we are going to have to let go of these beneficial attachments in some instance. And so I'm opening this up for discussion. Does letting go of attachments have benefit and utility? No wrong answers. I just want those that are willing to share their thoughts. Does letting go of attachments have benefit and utility, especially as we apply Jedi philosophy to our everyday real lives? Breeze, go ahead.
Things are going to let go of us, you know. I mean, we're going to lose things. Everything that is important to you is going to go away. The question is, does it go away before you do, so you have to sit there and watch? And in that sense, you know, you're going to lose. You are going to lose things. Does it have value and utility to meet the universe on the universe's terms? You know, I told my son today, he was asking for a thing, and he would ask again and again and again and again and again. And I said, you really have to let that go. And he said, no, I'm never going to let it go. And I said, well, then you're never going to be happy. You're never going to be all right, because, you know, so yeah, there's absolute value and utility to a willingness to let the universe not live under your total control. You know, keep things as long as they're yours, fine, whatever. But I mean, there's a necessity. Forget value and utility. There's an absolute necessity to knowing that you're not in control.
Very good. Very good, Breeze. Thank you. I think Jenna was next, so I'm not keeping track, so I'm going to defer to Brendan. Or Lucy was next. Okay, who's next, Brendan? Just tell me.
I think I'm the only one that had a hand raised. But
Okay, go ahead. Looks like Brendan's having a little trouble. Thank you, Brendan, though. Lucy, go ahead, please.
pretty much I'm going to agree. I had my hand raised before, and now I forgot who talked last.
It was Breeze.
I've had, I don't know if this is programmed into me from my previous religious experience, that things can't make you happy. The idea of I cannot be happy until this happens never works. If you can't have the mindset to be content with what you have, or be happy in the moment, or maybe with a little progress, you don't get there. So I would say the utility of letting go of attachments and realizing that whatever thing you have or that idea that you're going to get to someday will make you happy. Realizing that you need to be happy in the moment. It's just beneficial for your life.
Yeah, very good.
And your overall just outlook and positivity is. So, anyway, that's what I wanted to say there.
Good. So it looks like we've established that, yes, letting go of attachments not only does have benefit and utility or value, as Breeze said, but it's also necessary. And so now we're going to come back to that pin from an earlier slide that Jenna had about the impermanence of things, if I'm remembering that correctly. which leads us to the question of when do we let things go? And I'm going to go ahead and speak on this. And sometimes we find ourselves holding on to something too long, you know, and well past its time. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be physical things. It could even be an attachment to a mental attitude or a belief that we have, that once it's well served its purpose, it's time to let go. And let go we must. I'd like to ask Jenna if she's available, since we're circling back to what she said earlier, if she remembers, if you have any more on the impermanence and when it's time to let go. Jenna.
I don't have anything at the moment. Sorry.
Did we circle back to what you originally said, like I promised? I just want to make sure that
definitely.
Okay. So now we're going to discuss how to let go. Okay, this is where, so this has all been philosophy so far. So now we're getting into the practice, the actual process of letting go of attachment. And I build my Jedi practice. It comes from the fiction, I think from the role-playing games originally, I'm not sure. But there's this concept called the Pillars of Jedi Strength. And the 3 pillars are the Force, knowledge, and self-discipline. And so, in my old non-mystical approach to the Force, which is still valid, I like to say that a way that we use the Force, I'll put up air quotes, use the Force, is we inculcate these positive mental traits that are exemplified by the mythical Jedi, the fictional Jedi, the ideal Jedi, not Anakin. No, we won't count him, not him, but the good ones. And I think everyone in this room, and hopefully those watching this video later, has an idea in their head of what the perfect Jedi might be. That might be a certain character, might be combinations of characters with different traits. But I think we can all agree we have this image in our head of what a Jedi is, what they are not, the attitudes they hold. And it is up to us to inculcate these positive mental traits that are exemplified by what we see as this ideal Jedi, this mythical Jedi. Pardon me. Or as one of the students here, they can identify themselves if they please, told me about how they have this inner Jedi that helps them meditate, this archetype within their psyche that helps them, and it is that our inner ideal Jedi, inculcating the Force, will give us the tool set to let go of attachment, which brings us to the second pillar, knowledge. And when it comes to letting go of attachments, the knowledge we need is self-knowledge. We need to walk around in our internal landscape and see what these attachments are, what the root of them is, usually fear, as we discussed, and why we are holding on to them. And it's not until we do this work, this reflective self-examination, that we can gain this self-knowledge as to our attachments and the nature of the attachments. And then this leads us to a third pillar where the real work comes in, and that is self-discipline. So once we inculcate positive mental traits of our internal ideal Jedi, once we have the knowledge of what our attachments are, why we have them, then we can turn our self-discipline into letting them go, doing the hard, difficult work. I know this is succinct and formulaic, but by no means is it easy. I know we're doing this on the first class out of the gate, but letting go of attachments can be some of the most difficult internal work you will do as Jedi or as human beings. But do it we must. We've already answered the question that letting go has benefit and utility. It helps us in the long run. And as Breeze pointed out, sooner or later, it will become necessary. How we apply this self-discipline to do it will be as individual as the Jedi doing it. We each have our processes to do it. If you need help, you can seek individual help from a Jedi mentor or even a therapist. Because let's put it this way, the Jedi training is no substitute for therapy. And if there is something that needs addressed by a therapist, by all means, go to a therapist to get help. But for some attachments, we can use forced knowledge and self-discipline and be able to let go. So now, that I know I front-loaded a lot with that one. That was the lecture portion of the class. And I just want to open the floor to any thoughts on letting go and the praxis of letting go.
First up is Carlos.
Yeah, so I think in my life, one thing that took me honestly years to come to terms with is the person I perceive to be and the person that I'm perceived by others. In particular, I years and years, this was a source of conflict with me and my wife. She would perceive the things I said in one way, and I would be like, well, I didn't mean it like that. And she'd say, well, that, doesn't matter. I felt this way. And I had a hard time for years coming to terms with, just because I feel a certain way or express myself a certain way, it doesn't mean that that's going to be perceived that way on the other side. And I had to let go of the fact that, I can't just view myself in terms of ego. I have to view myself in terms of the way other people view me. And figuring that out and coming to terms with that was very helpful. Not just with my wife, but just with interpersonal relationships in general. Certainly. And that was a lot of work. It took time, but it was definitely worthwhile.
Thank you, Carlos. I'll get it eventually, I promise. Keep coming to class. I'll keep calling on you, and I'll get it right eventually. Yeah. Is there anyone else that has some thoughts on letting go? Brandon, can you tell me who's next, please?
Sorry, I must not have hit the button. Next is Turkenya.
Thank you. Turkenya, please go ahead.
So I'm the person that had the inner Jedi archetype, and I find that when I'm having trouble with something, I just do this visualization with this inner wise person that knows, which is just me, which is just the part of me that is without all of the ego and the attachment and everything else. And usually I can get to what the root is, at least, so that I can start the hard work of unraveling it. So I find that that's particularly helpful. And then, once you're at the root, then you have that self-knowledge, and then you can start to go into the discipline of, all right, now every time I notice this, I need to realize that this is the attachment. And that this is why I'm attached to this, and this is the fear or whatever, and then go from there. There's no simple way to do that part that I've discovered anyway.
No. Thank you, Sir Kenya. Thank you, and very insightful. And I loved when you told me about your inner Jedi, and it just clicked. It's like, yes, this is what I meant. I mean, I've been using this version of I've used the Force since I launched JediPath.org in 2012, and I conceived it before, but publicly I've been using this about inculcating the positive mental traits of an ideal Jedi for let's see, 8 years, and it's such a powerful image, and I'm so grateful for you bringing it to me, and it going forward, and now part of the Academy curriculum that you've contributed to, and I'm just so grateful for such a powerful insight and a great tool. And so you have my gratitude and you have my thanks.
You're welcome.
You ready for another hand?
Yes, I am,
Okay.
Brandon.
Breeze has his hand up.
Breeze, go ahead, please.
Boom. What I keep in my head is I try to keep it kind of simple. I have these 3 hand gestures that I equate with the notion of sort of attachment, non-attachment, detachment, and aversion. So I think of course, attachment is like this, right? Like the urge to, I'm going to hold it still, I'm going to keep it the way it is. Non-attachment is kind of like this, like I'm unwilling to engage. And aversion is, of course, like this. But when I think of non-attachment, I think of it like this, like think of it like a butterfly, you're willing to let it land, and you're willing to let it leave. You're not, that non-attachment isn't get rid of everything in your life, possess nothing. But it's not possess nothing, but not allow nothing in, And this was, I think, that the big trick is that when Yoda was like, you must let go of everything you're afraid to lose. I think what Anakin heard was, get rid of your secret wife. Just forget about Padme. And then Yoda may have actually said that if he'd heard about Padme, but I think what he was saying was, accept that the things that you love will leave, and be willing to let, the universe kind of be the universe. I think that's what letting go is sort of that willingness to let things in and let things out. And I think the time to let things go is now and all the time, no matter what it is. If we wait to let something go after it's gone, I think that's much too late. And certainly, I can say in my own life, particularly in romantic contexts, I've done some probably not lasting, but considerable at the time harm in trying to hold on to things and prevent them from leaving. And eventually let them go, but let them go after the fact. And I think it was probably more valuable to sort of let them go while they were here, because fighting to keep something that wants to move still has never worked for anybody before, not in the long term. But also the anxiety of I'm going to keep it here, I'm going to keep it here, I'm going to keep it here, keeps me from kind of interacting with whatever that is in a kind of pure way. Pure is not the best term for it, but if every time my wife looks at me, I beg her not to leave me, or tell her that she'll get it if she tries, that's going to get in the way of the free expression of that relationship. So every time I look at her, I go, yeah, this won't last forever. So let me make the best of it now. because the uncertainty, you know, if I let it, it's going to crack me, you know, like it would anybody else. So I think, you know, when to let go early and often, and how to let go. I have that image in my head of like, how am I interacting with this thing, like this, like this, like this, like that, you know.
That's fantastic. Like that's really good, Breeze. I mean, I've always enjoyed your insights for as long as I've known you, and I just think it's fantastic, and I'm grateful that you're here participating, and I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Is there anyone else?
There are no other hands at the moment.
Okay, so that's the class. So we got one last slide for further resources. We have my website, my YouTube, my book, my Facebook, and my Twitter. And everyone's welcome to check these out. There's lots of content as I've been building it since 2012. Some things are a little bit newer than others. YouTube is brand new at this point in 2020. And I just wanted to thank everyone for being here and for participating. And I will say, may the Force guide you and protect you always.